Do you guys remember the first time we see Crosshair? Do you remember how Hunter introduces him?
Crosshair, on the other hand, is not much of a conversationalist, but when you have to hit a precise target from 10 clicks, Crosshair's your man.
For those of you who don't know, clicks is American military jargon for the term not miles, but actually kilometers. You see, for all you non-Americans out there, we don't actually use the standard measurement system. We just pretend to in front of Europeans to piss them off. We actually use like metric for all the important stuff, like traveling into space, doing science, killing our enemies, or doing all three of those things at the same time, which is killing our enemies in space with science. That sounds so American. The term was popularized during the Vietnam War, and judging by Hunter's appearance, he hasn't come back from there just yet. Anyway, hitting a target from 10 kilometers away, well, that kind of seems like a tall tale, doesn't it? And that's because in our own world, we generally use firearms with solid projectiles with ballistic trajectories. Any successful shot over a few thousand meters is going to involve a great deal of luck, especially if there's a lot of wind in the area. Just a mile more of wind speed at any direction at those distances can make you miss a target by several meters. Now, if you believe the world is round and not a flat disc balanced on two elephants who are riding a cosmic turtle through the galaxy, then the rotation of the planet also needs to be factored in, when you're taking a shot at those ranges. But even then, the longest recorded sniper kill on Earth was around 3.8 kilometers in distance, and it was done by this 58-year-old Ukrainian man named Vyacheslav Kovalevsky. Sorry for butchering that. And he was using a single-shot bolt-action anti-material rifle. Get this is the best part. It's called the Horizon's Lord. As in, you're basically shooting to the horizon at those ranges. The longest shot that was ever hit in a non-combat situation was by some guys in Wyoming, not surprising, at a target more than 4.4 miles or around 7 kilometers away. It took them 69 attempts before getting the shot on target. And apparently by the time that round hit the target, it was traveling only at 689 feet per second, which is as slow as a, BB gun projectile, basically. I mean, some airsoft guns shoot like 500 FPS. Just to give you an idea of what happens to a bullet at those ranges. So yeah, a 10-kilometer shot, that's gonna be difficult. Granted, Crosshair's preferred weapon, the 7.73 Fire Puncher rifle, fires energy projectiles instead of bullets. That means no ballistic trajectory for the weapon, there's no bullet drop necessarily, but it doesn't mean that the energy from this round can dissipate over distance. It's just heat. I guess it's not wrapped in anything, right? But still, a 10-kilometer shot is really far off. As a matter of fact, when we were standing at ground level on a planet the size of Earth, we can really only see a mile or so into the distance. To see a target that is 10 kilometers away, you need to be at least 6 to 7 meters off the ground. You need to be on a building, at least on the 6 meters. What is that, like second story, I want to say? Yeah, second story. I guess the point is we don't really know if Hunter is just joking or he's over-embellishing this feat. But if this shot can be made, there are only like a handful of marksmen in galactic history that can make this shot. And Crosshair, well, he's definitely on this list. And if you don't believe me, well, hopefully at the end of this video you will, because we'll be going over his 12 best shots all throughout his combat history. Let's start out with a relatively tame shot. Relatively tame for the Bad Batch, who are not chill at all. During the Battle of Anaxes, the Bad Batch's LAAT gunship is shot down, leaving the unit stranded in pretty much open space without much cover. The Separatists quickly scramble a medium-sized droid force to wipe out any remaining clones who might have survived the crash. In response, the Bad Batch initiate what's known as Plan 82, aka Shockwave. It's one of the more complicated and aggressive plans that the clones have. This involves the unit's heavy Wrecker picking up some mobile cover. The entire unit will then rally behind Wrecker and run at the enemy using that cover. Once they're within throwing distance of the enemy, Tech makes some calculations for the optimal trajectory for a droid popper to be thrown by Hunter. And Crosshair has to hit this relatively small target while it's in midair, moving against the backdrop of a sky. It's basically skeet shooting, except you're not using shot here, you're using a sniper rifle with a zoomed-in scope that's probably not very useful for these situations anyway. Plus, you're taking enemy fire after running a couple hundred feet at full tilt. This is not an easy shot. Now, for those of you asking, why would they need to pull off this fancy shot in the middle of a battle anyway? Well, there's actually a pretty good reason here. The effect of hitting that droid popper in the air above the enemy formation is that the droid popper basically sets off and is able to increase its spread and range significantly, instead of having all of its energy soaked into the ground. It's basically the same concept as an airburst artillery shell. I think it's really cool when you see these over-the-top scenes, in Star Wars, and then you can find out like some real tactical reasons why they would actually use these techniques. Our next shot has a lot of the same challenges as our first shot has, but whereas the first shot was in the same range of skeet shooting, our next shot is basically in the range of anti-aircraft gunnery training. It's a lot further. During their next mission after Anaxes, the Bad Batch arrives to Skako Minor, where their Jedi Commander Anakin Skywalker is immediately lifted off by some winged creature. Once again, Tech serves as a spotter, feeds some data to Crosshair, proceeds to use Tech's shoulder as a brace for his fire puncher. Which, by the way, you'll see in this video, has a lot of really cool modular attachments that you can put onto it. It's a really nifty rifle. It's very flexible. Anyway, during this shot, he's using a grappling hook. It's a very heavy projectile, and somehow Crosshair still managed to hit the target while it's flying away from him and high up in the clouds. Hunter then proceeds to grab the hook from Crosshair and ends up
Going for a ride.
Extra point for the buddy shoulder brace move, a real-life tactic used when support is hard to find for your weapon. It's been used by hunters for massive punt guns. It's been used by anti-tank crews for anti-tank rifles. And the Germans actually used this tactic with great effect in the earlier years of World War II, making their MG-34 equipped machine gun teams a lot more mobile and therefore deadly. And fun fact, take a look at that MG-34, it might remind you of the DC-15 blaster rifle used by the Clint Troopers. Speaking of brace shots, in our next example, Crosshair is once again depending on another member of the Bad Batch to hold him up. On that mission to Skako Minor, the Bad Batch break into one of Wat Tambor's facilities to rescue the long thought to be dead clone, Echo. While trying to escape, the Bad Batch end up on a catwalk high above the ground. It's the Bad Batch's only weakness. Crosshair becomes unsteady and falls off the platform, but is grabbed by Wrecker at the last minute. At the same time, Tech is playing a previously recorded mating call of that flying creature who took Anakin in the last segment. And so there's the added threat and distraction of, horny winged animals flying around in the background. Droids are also quickly approaching the Bad Batch on the catwalk from both sides, and despite all this, Crosshair, who is now hanging upside down, and not only doing that, but dual wielding with a pistol in one hand and his fire puncher in the other, manages to actually hit a droid. I mean, not only is it extremely hard to find a target firing a rifle, unsupported with just one hand, he's flipping back from his left and right hands and alternating fire, meaning that he's probably ambidextrous. That's pretty cool. If you haven't figured out by now, Crosshair is a really serious dude. Not much brings joy or interest to his life. And so when Crosshair actually tries to have fun, it's kind of scary and awesome at the same time. While trying to escape a separatist ship full of battle droids during the Battle of Anaxes, Crosshair falls behind the rest of his unit and carries out a little bit of a rearguard action, if you can even call it that. I mean, generally speaking, in the tight confines of a ship where you have all these narrow corridors, having a marksman is just kind of a stupid thing to do. It's not really necessary. Ideally, you want a weapon with a high rate of fire that can control the narrow choke points that make up these kind of environments. Single shot really means accuracy, and you don't really need that when you're up that close. It's all about firepower here. Yet Crosshair casually prepares a hallway that is about to receive droids by throwing down a series of tiny little mirrors onto the wall. He's setting up a kill zone basically, and when the droids arrive, Crosshair takes a single shot and it bounces off every one of those mirrors and takes out about 20 droids, just like that. Two things to take away from here. That sniper rifle is ridiculously powerful. To maintain that energy after ricocheting off of several mirrors and then blasting their way through 20 droid holes is simply incredible. I mean, forget about dropping a lightsaber and having it appear on the other side of the earth. Take this sniper rifle, fire it to the ground, it might make it through. Also, this makes the whole 10-click kind of boast seem a lot more likely. And the second thing I want to take from this is that while everyone is fighting for their lives on the battlefield, Crosshair is playing games. He's freaking insane. I also really love this whole Gimli Legolas thing that Wrecker and Crosshair have during this battle. It's kind of cool.
Relax, Wrecker. You'll top him next time.
No, he won't.
That still only counts as one.
Okay, now we visit the last battle that the Bad Batch fight together for the Grand Army of the Republic. It's the last battle before Order 66. The Bad Batch were deployed to the planet of Color, and during this campaign they were assigned with taking out a column of Separatist armor supported by infantry. The Bad Batch had the high ground as usual, and Crosshair has a pretty cool attachment once again on his sniper rifle. This is a projectile that flies and then launches 2 grappling attachments, which can then hook 2 objects together. Crosshair uses this very specific attachment to perfectly rope together 3 AAT tanks, which Wrecker just proceeds to push off of a cliff. I'm not sure how these grappling attachments work. Like, does the sniper have to set the distance from which the 2 grappling hooks release? If so, that just makes this whole thing even that much crazier. Back on Kamino after Order 66, the Bad Batch are forced to undergo some tests by Wilhuff Tarkin to prove that they are still useful to the Empire. When the clones quickly pass the first test, Tarkin sends a second wave of droids armed with lethal weapons. I know, it's messed up. Normally that's not a problem for the Bad Batch, but since this is supposed to be a test, they now have non-lethal weapons and are supposed to fight a bunch of killer droids. Before you judge Tarkin for his actions here, keep in mind that this was how he was raised. He comes from a pretty crazy family. I would hate to be his kid. Anyway, the clones are forced to quickly adapt and find a way to make lethal weapons out of essentially stun guns. Crosshair comes up with a brilliant plan with Wrecker. He asks his brother to toss a knife into the air, which Crosshair proceeds to cleanly hit with his rifle, launching the blade straight into the face of a droid, decommissioning it. Like, I don't get it. Do they practice these type of shots? Like, how are they not surprised when these harebrained schemes actually work? It makes no sense. Now, Crosshair would stay with the Empire after our last incident, and the rest of the Bad Batch would leave, but the team would get back together at the end of the season on Tipica City, once again in a pretty hostile manner. Crosshair has his old squad mates surrounded by his new squad mates at Blaster Point. But when his non-clone soldiers get a bit too trigger-happy and are about to gun down his former clone brothers, Crosshair unleashes his plan B. You see, he's set up a bunch of mirrors for the showdown, and this time, with a pistol, he quickly unleashes one blaster round that kills his entire new squad. I don't know what's more impressive about this, the fact that Crosshair did this with a blaster pistol, or the fact that he knew exactly where everyone was gonna stand in this, showdown. Uncanny. Now, after this little showdown, Crosshair is detained by his former brothers. They don't just gun him down because he did save their lives after all. But during their attempt to run away from Tipica City, Vice Admiral Rampart unleashes the fury of his Venator-class Star Destroyers, turbolasers, and destroys everything with the clones inside. While trying to save everyone from this underwater grave, the droid AZ falls behind and runs out of battery. Omega, who never leaves anyone behind, decides to dive in after the droid, but quickly runs out of oxygen. With little hopes of recovering her, Crosshair jumps into action. He grabs his sniper rifle, puts on that grappling hook, and he somehow manages to hit AZ dead center and drags him and Omega out of the freezing water. A word of advice: if you're ever running away from bullets and you have no place to take cover, diving into a body of water is not the worst idea, and that's because water has a density somewhere around 800 times more than air, which means when a water goes and transitions from air to water, it's not exactly hitting a brick wall, but there is going to be some disturbances to the flight path or the swim path or the travel path of the bullets. Also, the lack of visibility, the underwater currents, the movement of the platform that Crosshair is on makes this a very difficult shot to pull off. Plus, every other clone also has their blasters pointed at him during the shot. He is not trusted. Crosshair returns to the Empire after this incident, and one of the first missions he goes on after he returns is the world of Desix, where a group of Separatist holdouts and droids are still maintaining control of the local system. And so basically this is a rematch, just like the good old days. Clones versus droids. Heck, even Commander Cody comes along this time and their shuttle gets shot down on the way to the objective, just like at the Battle of Anaxes. So anyway, the thing that shoots down their dropship is actually an AAT, which is really impressive. They're basically dumb-firing a tank turret at a moving dropship. That's some Battlefield 3 level nonsense right there, guys. What's even crazier is that Crosshair attempts to take down the tank moments later after he emerges from his crashed shuttle. Look, you don't need to be a Star Wars weapons expert to realize that a fire puncher round is not going to penetrate the armor of an AAT from any direction. But Crosshair is a crazy idea. You see, he lets off a few shots at the tank with his sniper rifle, forcing the droid commander there to duck and batten down the hatches. He misses the shots on purpose, because the idea here is not to hit someone. Crosshair wants the tank crew's attention. I can prove this because he's also completely out of cover. Concealment is half the game when it comes to being a sniper. There's no reason why Crosshair would stand like this, unless he really wanted to. Once the tank crew sees Crosshair, they begin to track him with their turrets. When they let loose a shot that goes wide, Crosshair actually helps them correct their shot by firing once again at them, guiding their turret directly towards his position. You see, Crosshair realizes the moment that the AT manages to acquire him in their sights, he will also have a clean view down the barrel of the tank. And since these tanks use shells that are full of gas, the idea here is to send a round down the barrel as it fires, which hopefully will detonate the round inside of the barrel. It's basically the Russell Cast maneuver from Independence Day. And somehow Crosshair pulls it off. And forget the difficulty of hitting a target that small, forget the difficulty of staring at a tank as its turret slowly turns towards you. And think about the timing that's required here. You shoot a little too early, nothing happens. You shoot a little too late, nothing matters. That tank shot was just the beginning of the assault. By the way, I love how the clones with Crosshair basically don't react at all after he pulls off this amazing shot. I mean, their designated marksman just took out a tank with a rifle. You'd think there'd be some question, some curiosity, some shock, maybe some celebration. I mean, the other day I was defending managed democracy, and Congo managed to one-shot an automaton tank, and I actually forced them to give me an after-action briefing of how he did it, because I really wanted to know. Anyway, I digress. Crosshair and Commander Cody's assault team get whittled down one by one in some very gritty, close-quarter fighting. I mean, this entire episode is just about cursed architecture and dangerous angles, intersections, and funnels. But the worst scenario is saved for the end, when Crosshair and Cody have to fight their way up a circular staircase, which is held by a bunch of very nasty commando droids. You're dealing with extremely tight quarters. Your enemy is on the defensive. They know where you are, where you're going to come from, and they also have the Obi-Wan. And then there are the hostages in the room to complicate the situation. Gotta hand it to the Bad Batch. They're really good at creating unwinnable situations in their TV show. How does Crosshair and Cody tackle this deadly approach? Well, first he launches one mirror, which gives him a bit more reach up the stairwell, and then Cody, who's armed with a carbine, fights forward and tosses another mirror further up the stairs, which Crosshair has to sight in his other mirror before firing. The shot hits the first mirror and then ricochets off the other mirror while it's in midair and takes out every commando droid in the stairwell, plus the tactical droid upstairs. Game, set, and match. Commander Cody would defect after the mission to Desix, leaving Crosshair even more alone than before. His next mission would be to an isolated outpost on Barton 4, manned by a clone commander named Mayday. Crosshair and Mayday would be sent on a reconnaissance mission to find insurgents in the area who have been stealing supplies from the Imperial outpost. During the mission, Mayday proceeds on foot and tries to infiltrate the base up close, and Crosshair is providing overwatch. Mayday almost gets overwhelmed by a group of insurgents wielding electrostaffs, deadly and dangerous weapons. But Crosshair fires off 3 quick shots and peels the insurgents right off of him. That is a freaking ballsy move. A person's movement is hard enough to predict. Shooting 3 individuals who are moving at top speed with a friendly in the middle who is about to get hit in the face with a gigantic electrical pole is not a scenario that most marksmen would be comfortable taking on. And Crosshair and Mayday, this is the first time they've even met each other. I mean, this is a really intimate thing to do on your first date with someone. Now, in our last scene, Crosshair is a bit different from the Crosshairs we've seen in the other previous 11 shots. After ingesting some toxic gas created by Dr. Hemlock, Crosshair seems to have developed a tremor in his hands, and it definitely has a huge effect on his accuracy. After escaping from Dr. Hemlock's Imperial facility with Omega, the two arrive on the planet Lau, which they also have to quickly escape. During a firefight at the local spaceport, Crosshair and Omega are pinned down by a basic TK stormtrooper who is in an elevated firing position behind cover. The Imperial has a clear advantage against Crosshair, who is just using a simple carbine during this firefight. Despite taking heavy fire, Crosshair tries to reposition himself for a shot. When a group of exotic animals come stampeding from another part of the port, Crosshair uses the animals' cover to fire off this beauty of a shot and takes out the TK Stormtrooper. 9 out of 10 times, the guy in the building defeats the guy on the ground. But in this case, Crosshair still proves he has what it takes, even if he's a bit shakier than usual.